The small house on the edge of town carried two things that never left: the warmth of laughter and the weight of exhaustion. That night the air felt still, the soft glow of the nightlight painted gentle shadows on the nursery wall. Oliver, just 6 months old and paralyzed from the waist down, slept soundly in his crib. His round cheeks were peaceful, as if the noisy world outside had bowed in quiet respect at his door. Grace closed the nursery door carefully. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights, yet a faint smile lingered on her lips. In the next room, Tom had fallen asleep on the sofa, his laptop still open beside him. Their days were filled with therapy schedules, lists of medicines, and endless doctor visits. Beneath all of it was something stronger than fear, a love that endured in silence. In the corner of the nursery, a scruffy little puppy stood guard. His name was Charlie. Found in their backyard one misty morning, he had been welcomed into the family almost by fate. From the very beginning, Charlie seemed to understand that in this house there was a duty greater than play. He often lay close to the crib, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the baby as if he had promised to protect him. Time moved like a slow river. The ceiling fan spun lazily, turning the silence into rhythm. Wooden floors absorbed the cool of the night, echoing back only stillness. On nights like this Grace usually drifted in her rocking chair, letting weariness wash away. But tonight something felt different, thin and sharp, like a thread stretched too tight in the air. Charlie rose to his feet. He circled the crib, his small claws tapping lightly against the floor. His tail did not wag as usual. His eyes were focused, steady on Oliver's sleeping face. He stepped closer, lifted his head, and waited. Silence stretched longer than comfort, no longer a friend but something that pressed against the room, holding its breath. In the living room, Tom shifted in his sleep, unaware. Grace checked the clock, counting the hours since Oliver last stirred. Everything seemed normal, or so she wanted to believe. She hesitated, debating whether to look in again, her heart restless, her feet heavy with doubt. A mother's instinct is a compass, yet tonight that compass spun slowly without direction. Charlie tilted his head. He sniffed the air, reading what could not be seen. His breath quickened, his body stiffening like a bow drawn tight. He crossed to the other side of the crib, checking from another angle, searching for what his instincts already whispered. His ears twitched, catching a sound too faint for human ears. The nightlight cast a soft glow on Oliver's cheek. In that fragile light, the world seemed delicate, easily broken. Charlie let out a low whine, barely audible. A moment later, silence again, his eyes shifting to the half-open door. His breathing changed. The air thickened with his unease. Grace rose finally, a pull in her chest telling her to move, though hesitation still clung to her. She glanced at Tom asleep on the sofa. Only a few steps stood between her and her son's crib, only a touch to confirm all was well. Yet she stayed still, holding on to a thin calm that could shatter at any second. Charlie placed his front paws gently against the crib rail. He did not climb, only raised himself high enough to look closer. His gaze locked on Oliver's face. Then something shifted in the air, silent, invisible, but real. His nose quivered, ears sharpened, and his small body froze like stone carved with sudden purpose. He lowered his paws, stepped back, and positioned himself firmly between the crib and the door. The room was still, the ticking clock loud in its patience. Within Charlie, a decision formed, born of instinct older than words. He looked once at Oliver, then toward the living room, then back at Oliver. And as if the entire house held its breath together, Charlie released a sound he had never made before. It cut through the silence like a blade, a cry that would turn that quiet night into something unforgettable, a moment that would change everything in the small home forever. Grace startled awake, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a split second she thought she had been dreaming, but then the sound came again, sharp and urgent. Charlie's bark echoed down the hallway like an alarm bell that refused to be ignored. Tom stirred on the sofa, groggy and confused, muttering something incoherent as he rubbed his eyes. Another bark followed, louder, carrying a tremor that made the hair on Grace's arms rise. She pushed herself to her feet, her pulse quickening with a fear she couldn't yet name. "Something's wrong," she whispered under her breath, though no one needed convincing. Her body was already moving, faster than her thoughts could catch up. The nursery door creaked open, and Grace froze at the threshold. The warm glow of the night light no longer felt gentle, it felt fragile, stretched too thin across the room. Oliver lay still in his crib, but there was something about his stillness that struck terror deep into her chest. His tiny lips carried the faintest shade of blue, his breaths shallow and uneven like whispers struggling to exist. "Tom!" Her voice cracked, high-pitched with panic. The urgency in it jolted Tom upright. He stumbled toward her, eyes widening as the scene came into focus. The sight of Oliver's small chest rising unevenly sent an icy wave of dread through him. Grace rushed forward, scooping Oliver into her arms with trembling hands. His body was too warm, his face too pale, and every instinct inside her screamed that time was slipping away. She tilted him gently, patting his back, urging his lungs to remember how to breathe. "Come on, baby," she murmured, her voice breaking, "stay with me." Tom's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy against the glowing screen. He managed to dial, blurting their address to the emergency operator. His voice was taut, desperate, the kind of voice that came from a man staring at the edge of unthinkable loss. Charlie barked again, circling them, his body tense as though he understood the stakes. He wasn't just making noise anymore. He was urging, pushing them forward, demanding they fight harder. His sharp yelps filled the room, a chorus of urgency that refused to be silenced. Grace's training as a nurse clawed its way past her panic. She adjusted Oliver's head, checked his airway, and pressed her ear to his chest. The faint raspy sound of his breath was there, but weak and inconsistent. She tapped gently on his back, coaxing each breath like it was a fragile flame on the verge of going out. In the distance, faint but growing, came the wail of sirens. Relief mixed with fear. Help was near, yet seconds still mattered. Tom paced in the doorway, torn between helplessness and the fierce need to act. His knuckles were white around the phone, his eyes locked on Oliver's twitching little frame. The sirens drew closer, their cries spilling into the night. Lights flashed against the nursery window, painting the walls in streaks of red and blue. Grace clutched Oliver tighter as footsteps thundered up the porch. Charlie barked wildly, then fell silent, retreating just enough to let the strangers in. Paramedics filled the room with brisk efficiency, their voices calm but urgent. Grace stepped back, unwilling but knowing she must, as gloved hands took over. Oliver was laid on a small stretcher, monitors clipped to his tiny chest, oxygen mask covering his nose and mouth. One of the medics glanced at Grace and Tom, his eyes serious yet steady. "You got him here in time," he said firmly. "Another few minutes, and it could have been worse." Grace's knees nearly gave way. She clung to Tom's arm, her breath ragged. Tom held her close, his own face pale but determined. Their eyes fell on Charlie, who sat rigid near the crib, ears still alert, eyes unblinking. It dawned on them then, clear and undeniable, if not for the puppy's cries in the night, they might never have woken in time. The ambulance tore through the quiet streets, siren wailing into the darkness. Inside, Grace clutched Oliver's tiny hand, her other hand gripping the side rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. His chest rose and fell beneath the mask, each breath mechanical and shallow. The steady beeping of the monitor seemed louder than the siren itself, a constant reminder of how fragile each second was. Tom sat across from her, eyes locked on their son, silently begging him to hold on. His mind was a storm of fear and memory, the long hours of therapy sessions, the tears Grace tried to hide, the nights they whispered reassurances to each other even when neither believed them. And now everything felt like it was hanging by a single thread. Grace leaned forward, pressing her lips to Oliver's forehead. His skin burned with fever. "Stay with us," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm, like a promise she would not let go of. The paramedic glanced at her. "He's stable for now. We'll get him through this. Just focus on him." Stable. The word was meant to calm, but Grace knew how quickly it could all change. She exchanged a look with Tom, both silently acknowledging the truth. They had walked this line before, but never this close to the edge. Moments later, the ambulance screeched to a halt at the hospital entrance. Doors flung open, cold air rushing in. The team whisked Oliver through bright corridors under harsh fluorescent lights, their footsteps echoing against sterile walls. Grace and Tom followed, their breaths shallow, their world narrowing to the sight of their child's small body surrounded by machines and strangers. Charlie wasn't there, but his presence lingered in Grace's chest. The memory of his frantic bark still pulsed like a drumbeat. She whispered his name under her breath, as though drawing strength from the little guardian who had sounded the alarm. In the examination room, doctors worked quickly, voices low but urgent. Thermometers beeped, blood was drawn, and 4 lines were set. Grace stood close, answering rapid-fire questions, her training as a nurse fighting through her panic. Tom hovered at her side, his hand gripping her shoulder like an anchor. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, at last, the lead doctor turned toward them. His tone was firm but measured. "He's developed a severe fever. The good news is you caught it early. We'll keep him under close watch tonight, but your quick action may have saved him from something far worse." Grace let out a shaky breath, tears spilling freely now. She turned into Tom's chest, and he held her tightly, neither of them speaking, just listening to the fragile sound of Oliver's breathing as if it were the most precious song in the world. By morning, Oliver's fever began to subside. The doctors reassured them that he was safe to return home, though vigilance was more important than ever. Exhausted but relieved, they bundled him gently in a soft blanket. When they stepped through their front door, Charlie was waiting. He bounded forward, tail wagging furiously, eyes shining with worry and relief. Grace crouched down, stroking his head with trembling fingers. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice breaking, "our little guardian." Charlie nestled against her, as if he understood the weight of her gratitude. Tom closed the door softly behind them, the house filling with a fragile calm. But in the quiet that followed, a shadow still lingered. For as much as they wanted to believe the worst was behind them, they could not shake the memory of Oliver's blue lips, the silence that almost swallowed him whole. And though no one said it aloud, each of them knew, deep down, Charlie's bark had saved Oliver once. But would it be enough if it happened again? The house seemed to hold its breath in the days that followed. Grace and Tom moved through their routines with extra care, watching Oliver as though every second carried weight. The fever had passed, yet the memory of his pale lips and faint breath clung to them like a shadow that refused to lift. Charlie rarely left Oliver's side. At night he lay close to the crib, his ears twitching at every shift and sigh. During the day he followed Grace from room to room, always pausing to glance back toward the nursery. It was as if he had taken an oath no one asked him to swear, a promise written not in words but in instinct. One evening, fatigue overcame Tom. He sat slumped on the sofa, the soft hum of his laptop fading into the rhythm of his shallow snores. Grace lingered in the nursery, rocking Oliver gently until his eyelids fluttered shut. The room was awash in the dim glow of the nightlight, walls painted with soft gold shadows. For a moment it seemed peace had finally returned. But Charlie knew better. He shifted suddenly, lifting his head from the floor. His ears pricked, his nose quivered. A soft whine slipped from his throat, quiet but insistent. He paced around the crib, nails tapping against the wooden floor. His body tensed, every muscle drawn tight like a bowstring. Grace frowned. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, kneeling to stroke his fur. Her hand trembled, though she didn't know why. She searched Oliver's face, but the baby slept soundly, his breath steady, his cheeks flushed with warmth. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing at all. And yet Charlie would not settle. His whines sharpened, his pacing quickened. Finally, with a sudden urgency, he barked. The sound cracked through the silence like a whip, jolting Tom awake in the other room. He stumbled toward the nursery, his face pale. What happened? Before Grace could answer, Oliver stirred. His chest rose unevenly, a faint rasp escaping his lip. The peaceful rhythm of his breathing fractured into shallow gasps, his tiny fists twitching weakly against the blanket. "Tom!" Grace cried, scooping him into her arms. The blue tint returned to his lips, faint but terrifying. Panic surged through her as she tried to stimulate his breathing, patting his back with desperate urgency. Tom's phone slipped in his trembling hands as he dialed for help again, the number etched into his fear. His voice cracked as he relayed their address, pleading for speed. Charlie barked louder, circling them, eyes wide and fierce. He pressed close to Grace's leg as though lending her his strength, his sharp yelps echoing down the hallway. Seconds felt like hours. Grace's heart pounded in her ears as she worked, coaxing breath back into Oliver's fragile body. The boy gasped suddenly, chest jerking, then coughed weakly. Relief hit her like a tidal wave, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. Sirens screamed in the distance once more. The sound was salvation and terror all at once. Grace held Oliver close, rocking him as though her arms alone could keep him alive. Her tears soaked his blanket, but her voice remained steady as she whispered over and over, "Stay with me. Stay with me." Tom stood frozen in the doorway, phone still pressed to his ear. His gaze fell to Charlie, who remained unyielding by Grace's side, barking with raw urgency. And in that moment, Tom understood with bone-deep clarity. This was no ordinary puppy. Charlie wasn't just watching over Oliver. He was fighting for him. The emergency room lights were harsh and cold, washing every shadow from the walls. Grace and Tom stood side by side, gripping each other's hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. Oliver lay on a small hospital bed surrounded by beeping machines, wires running across his tiny body like threads of fragile hope. Grace's chest ached with every breath she drew. She had faced life and death before as a nurse, but never like this, never with her own child. Each rise and fall of Oliver's chest felt like a battle waged in silence, and she could not look away even for a second. Charlie hadn't been allowed past the hospital doors, yet his presence clung to them. Grace could almost hear the echo of his bark in her ears, like a reminder that he had sounded the alarm, that he had saved Oliver again. Time stretched endlessly until at last the pediatric specialist entered, a clipboard in his hands and a heaviness in his eyes. Grace braced herself. Tom straightened, his jaw locked tight. The doctor spoke gently, yet every word fell like a stone. "Your son has a condition called central apnea. It's rare. Sometimes the brain simply forgets to send the signal to breathe." Grace felt the room tilt beneath her. Forget. The word clung to her lips like something poisonous. The doctor nodded. "It can happen suddenly, without warning. It's dangerous, especially in infants with existing neurological conditions. But the good news is it can be managed. We'll provide you with a monitor that tracks his breathing and alerts you if there's an issue." Tom's grip on Grace's hand tightened. "So, we'll know when it happens again?" "Yes," the doctor said, his tone steady. "The monitor will help you act quickly. It will give you peace of mind." Peace of mind. Grace almost laughed at the phrase, bitter and broken. Nothing about this would ever feel peaceful. Still, she nodded, her tears held back by sheer force of will. "Thank you," she whispered. When they finally returned home, Oliver bundled carefully in Grace's arms. The monitor followed. They set it up by his crib, the steady hum and small blinking lights filling the room with a strange comfort. Yet even with the machine in place, Charlie refused to move from his post. He curled himself beside the crib, ears pricked, body taut with vigilance. His eyes never strayed from Oliver, not for long. That night, as Grace lay awake listening to the quiet beeps of the monitor, she watched Charlie in the dim glow. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes were wide open, reflecting the light like two tiny lanterns. She whispered softly, so only he could hear, "You're more than a pet, Charlie. You're his guardian." Charlie's ears twitched, his tail thumping once against the floor as if in answer. Grace closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek. The machines might help them. The doctors might guide them. But in her heart she knew, when silence fell and danger crept close, it was Charlie who would wake them, Charlie who would fight beside them. The little stray they once thought needed saving had become their savior. The weeks that followed slipped into a new rhythm. The monitor hummed quietly each night, its light blinking in steady intervals, but still Charlie never left Oliver's side. He paced, he whined, he listened. Sometimes he barked before the machine even made a sound, as though his instincts ran deeper than wires and circuits could ever reach. One afternoon Grace was in the kitchen when Charlie's sharp barks shattered the quiet. She rushed to the nursery and found Oliver's tiny leg caught between the crib slat. He hadn't cried, hadn't moved, but Charlie had noticed. Relief flooded her as she freed him. She scooped the puppy into her arms, whispering, "Good boy. You're more than a guardian. You're our angel." Word of Charlie's watchful ways spread among family and neighbors. Grace's sister, a veterinarian, watched him with wonder. "You should consider training him as a service dog," she said. "His instincts are extraordinary." The idea took root in Grace's heart. Could it be that Charlie's presence was no accident? One crisp morning, as golden light spilled through the windows, a knock came at the door. On the porch stood a man with tired eyes and a worn envelope in his hand. He shifted nervously as he said, "It's about your son." Grace and Tom exchanged a wary glance. The man explained he had known Oliver's birth mother, Carla. He handed them the envelope and left before they could ask more. Inside were photographs, Carla cradling baby Oliver, and at her feet, unmistakably, a much younger Charlie. Grace gasped. He was hers. Tears filled her eyes. Charlie wasn't a random stray. He had been tied to Oliver's life since the very beginning, entrusted perhaps in ways they might never understand. That night, as Oliver slept, Grace stroked Charlie's fur and whispered, "You've been watching over him all along, haven't you?" Charlie lifted his head, his dark eyes reflecting something more than instinct, something like memory. Just as peace began to return, another knock shattered their fragile calm. This time it was not kindness that stood at their door, but fear. Oliver's biological father, Brian Dempsey, had found them. His presence was heavy, his voice bitter with regret and excuses. He spoke of rights, of second chances, but Grace saw only danger in his eyes. Charlie planted himself between Oliver's crib and the man's shadow, growling low, his body rigid with defiance. The days that followed were filled with tension, court hearings, legal battles, nights spent awake with dread. Yet through it all, Charlie remained steadfast. He barked at every sound, watched every corner of the house. He seemed to know that the threat lingered near, waiting for a chance to strike. At the courthouse, when the judge weighed their future, Grace spoke through tears, her voice unwavering. "Oliver is our son. We have given him love, stability, and life itself. And when silence nearly stole him, it was Charlie who saved him." The judge's gavel fell with finality. Full custody was granted to Grace and Tom. A restraining order was placed against Brian. The Millers left the courthouse with Oliver in their arms and Charlie at their side, the weight of fear lifting at last. Seasons shifted, but one truth never changed: Oliver and Charlie were inseparable. When Oliver learned to crawl, it was Charlie who crawled beside him. When Oliver pulled himself up for the first time, it was Charlie's fur he clung to. Step by fragile step, the little boy leaned on the little dog, each milestone a miracle born from loyalty and love. One evening, as the sun set in shades of orange and rose, the family sat together in the backyard. Oliver leaned against Charlie, his tiny hand resting on soft fur. "Love you, Charlie," he whispered in his sweet, unsteady voice. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she watched the scene unfold, a portrait painted in light and devotion. Tom slipped an arm around her shoulders. "Charlie isn't just a pet," he murmured. "He's family. He's a gift." The laughter of their son echoed in the fading light, blending with the quiet pant of the puppy who had never left his side. In that moment, Grace knew their story wasn't one of despair, but of resilience, of second chances, and of the miracle that had arrived in the form of a scruffy stray. Charlie had been more than their savior. He was proof that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest guardian can hold the greatest power. And so the miller's home, once filled with shadows, glowed with light, laughter, and the steady presence of a puppy who had become their miracle.